pretty damn simple. Don't drink very much. Stop drinking for a while, 3-4 days. Probably sleep better. That's a simple one. That's pretty clear. So that's cool. Happy about that. Excited about that. It's been about, I started not drinking last Sunday. And so now it's Friday. And all of my activities have increased in vigor and clarity. It's nice. It's rewarding. I really enjoy it. I'm a little bit kind of like about the weekend, right? Which is the weekend, get to have the weekend and, get to have some drinks on the weekend, hang out, have drinks on the weekend. It's not a big deal. Largely because you can't really go anywhere to have drinks. It's not like I'm missing out on anything. If you haven't taken a kind of a break from alcohol and you feel like, maybe now's the time to take a break, now's the time to do it. I don't know. It's up to you. But it's definitely had an impact, and I'm thinking about it less. I'm thinking about the desire of a drink less. It doesn't really show up, and it's cool. All right, so I'm actually pretty excited about this stanza because it has a lot. There's a lot to it, and I think there's a lot to it that's easy to kind of share. So the title for this stanza is "Politics is the Mental Health of the Nation." I think this is very accurate, and here's why. For a long time, mental health was perceived as simply kind of, I guess, the intellect. So mental health was the intellect. And so the intellect was kind of what you can think of, what you can plan for, and what's successful, what works, structures, very structured. The way we interacted with the non-formatic stuff, emotional stuff, and I guess spirituality was kind of positioned in that same realm, the non-formatic, was kind of a stoicism or a faith, a pressing down of anything that showed up. It's kind of what I'm imagining the post-World War eras were, World War II eras. It's just kind of how I'm imagining that. But I think what's really interesting is to look at a couple examples of how this plays out now. So I remember having a conversation with my mother-in-law about kind of the early days of Trump running for office. And I remember she said, in our family, we just don't talk about politics. And I thought that thinking back on that now in the context of this statement is very prescient. It makes sense that would be her attitude, and based on what I understand about her, having been her son-in-law for over 10 years now, and knowing the family, there is a pronounced absence of conversation around kind of the realms of mental health, the kind of emotional response to things, the response to conflict, doubt, worry, fear, these kind of things. There's this total shutdown of conversation about it, and then so it's like it's even, then something that isn't accounted for happens, and there's a spike. And so there's like this abrupt spike in kind of mental conflict. So there's a mental health conflict that takes place, largely because everything is flat. Then there's this spike, right? Boom, these spikes, okay? So that's kind of one example. Another example I would say is the president himself. his interaction with mental health is very clear in blame and projection. So he is in a perpetual state of blame. Something is happening that's out of his control and it's not his fault. And then projection. So what he's feeling on the inside is projected to the outside world as them doing that to him. And so that's just really fascinating to kind of perceive as a political style, right? So I'm talking about this as a political style. I'm not talking about the individual. I'm talking about politics. So his political style is blame and projection. And so to always double down, to always interact with, whatever shows up as either being a victim or, having supernatural powers. He either is the victim of something that's beyond his control or he has supernatural powers, which in the context of politics kind of makes a lot of sense. He doesn't participate in a kind of a healthy interaction with things. He's like it reminds me of like the absentee parent who only shows up with, big gifts, right? Keeps the kid happy with big gifts, like, I haven't seen you in 5 years, but here's a car. Oh, Dad, I love you, blah, 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 right? So like, the way he's interacting with the population now is kind of like these, grand schemes, like, oh, well, this will be fixed, or this will be fixed. There's no substance to it. It's just a kind of a, and then the other kind of side of things is, say, the left, right? The left, the far left in particular, the radical left, because I would argue that the president is part of the radical right. So the radical right counters that kind of style of politics with a style of adherence. So if you don't adhere to these standards, it's attack, attack, attack. So the radical left has fully embraced a kind of heartless mental health. It's a style that has no room anymore. There's no room for compassion. There's no room for patience. There's only change. There must be change, and there's only change. Now, here's the point I want to make around all this stuff, okay? Our egos, because our ego is kind of our arbiter of our mental health. We have to be mentally healthy, we have to have our ego in check. And if we don't have our ego in check, which basically means that you understand that you're not your ego, you're the awareness of your ego. But if you think you're your ego, then anytime your ego perceives success, you will think what you did is the right thing to do. That's really important to understand. If you don't understand the separation between your awareness and your ego, you can perceive your ego's success or any success that you have as the right thing to do. So, the radical right and the radical left are both perceiving success. And they're perceiving that as success, meaning that that's the right thing to do. Which means that we're going to see more of the same stuff, even if it's not the right thing to do now. So it's such an interesting thing. And so that's what's so interesting about the practice of mindfulness, bringing it back to the practice. And this is something that I'm really only becoming adept at articulating now, because it's just been hard to get to this place. And what I mean is, success doesn't exist. Okay? It doesn't exist. If it exists, it only exists in patterns that mimic nature. It doesn't exist in the context of, I've done this, this is the way. It exists beyond the ego. The ego can establish the frame, but it's ultimately the non-framework stuff that creates success. And another way to think about that is, when we go into the practice, what we're doing is we're interacting with a framework of awareness. We're doing something that I'm now thinking about as awareness framing. So I'm framing your awareness, first bell at your senses. I'm framing your awareness, second bell at your body, third bell at your breath, and fourth bell at your heart. I'm framing that awareness. Now, by framing, I mean I'm just kind of creating a space essentially out of nothing that provides a framework for you to be present with. And so what happens inside that framework is not imaginable. It's not something you plan for. It's something that exists inside the framework, but once inside the framework, it is awareness and presence that's driving the boat, not anything else. It's not your intellect. It's not your ego. That's not what's driving it. It's what your presence is driving it. Now, what's cool is that as you become more and more present, and as you become less and less inclined to follow your ego's assumptions or expectations about the moment, you'll participate with the moment in ways you never would have imagined. And the reason why that happens is that life mimics nature, and we are a part of nature. We're not separate from nature. It's the ego. The ego facilitated self-identity, which we're forever grateful for as a kind of a human experience. Without the ego, we would still just be like other animals. But the ego broke that space. The ego, if divinity is everything, the ego recognized itself. Where's a good finger to use here? The ego recognized itself, right? And started to see individualism, which is awesome, because without that, the kind of experience of life would be less full. But because of that break, we get to experience actual self separate, which is great. But we're still not separate. We're still not separate from nature. Now, we've developed a structured way of thinking and being in patterns and politics that perceives us as separate from nature. Nature's out there. We are here. We are human. But that's just a misunderstanding. So when you get into the practice, what you're doing is you're blending consciously, you're blending back with the whole, and then you're riding the experience as it evolves. Now, even inside the experience, there isn't a sense of absence of self. There's a sense of being fully present inside the full capacity of self. And so the ego blends in. It blends. And so what you see is this kind of flow and this kind of wonderment and this kind of awesomeness. And you've seen it 1,000 times before. You've seen it in good conversation. You've seen it in sports. You've seen it in a crisis moment where you just handled everything. You're like, whoa, I can't believe I just did that. You've seen all this stuff before. And so what happens is that you don't necessarily recognize what's happened, and so you don't know how to recreate it. Recreating this experience, flow state, there's lots of names for it. Recreating this experience is not that hard. It's not really hard at all. But what's hard about it is getting past the ego, right? And that's kind of where we're at in politics. Well, that's where our nation is in a mental health crisis, because we have forgotten our relationship to each other, and we've gone to the absolute extremes, and now we're in a crisis upon crisis upon crisis, and all of our typical frameworks for how to do this and how to be successful aren't successful anymore. They're not working. And so what we're doing now is we're on, and at every form, is we're just re-articulating the old failed patterns in more intense versions. And so you can expect to see more intense versions of the same patterns as things kind of ratchet up. Now the hope is that we can get to a place of compassion and insight and move into kind of a new pattern that does not perceive success by old standards. Now, hope to get there, and I'm confident that we will. Now, but in the meantime, you can practice this, and this is the mindfulness practice. Now, I practice this outside with all kinds of different stuff, and it's just the best, because I'll roll up on something with no plan. And lots of people I train and work with and interact with, my wife included, look at me like I'm an idiot. Like, no plan. How can you not have a plan? Now, a couple weeks ago, I said have a plan. There's different layers of this, but in the moment, right, in the actual moment, the plan is simply to train. It's simply to train. And then that's the plan. The plan isn't what to do in the training. The plan is to train. And then when you get to training, you shut down the plan and you become fully present. And when you become fully present, the experience guides you. And the experience guides you in patterns found in nature. And so you don't have to worry about what am I going to do once I train. You simply have to get into present tense focus, an awareness framework. And I've provided the awareness framework for you. 4 steps, 4 bells, however you want to think about it. That's the awareness framework. All you have to do is get into that framework, and the patterns of nature will take over the rest. Patterns of nature, what the hippie shit are you talking about? I'm not talking about hippie shit. I'm talking about things like gravity, inertia, alignment, structure, speed, intensity. Every physical property you can think of is applied to you at all times. And so when you're present with them, you don't have to have your ego figure out what to do. You just have to blend in with what's happening. And that's it. I mean, that is it. Now, getting over all the other stuff that's been kind of drilled into our being as the way, that's the hard part. That's the hard part. It's especially hard if you've got trauma. It's especially hard if your greatest identity was in your past and all this other kind of stuff. So it's hard to break through all that. So I call it armor down. But once you do that, oh, it's so great. It's just the best. I mean, you're right. All right, I got to train. What am I going to do? That conversation's done. There's no more. The conversation is no longer valid. It's I'm going to train. How are you going to train? Well, I'll see when I get there. Well, what's the plan? Well, first I'm going to do some stuff to really get myself present with my senses, really kind of start to feel things. Second, I'm going to really get into my posture. Third, I'm going to really focus on my breath, kind of really get connected in and out. And then fourth, I'm just going to open up. I'm going to open up to what things are developing, and then I'm going to kind of flow into that. And I'm like, huh? But that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing over and over and over again. And just like with anything else you've trained, once you've done something over and over again, it becomes automatic, it becomes muscle memory, and mindfulness memory, right? Mindfulness becomes mindfulness memory, like muscle memory. It just kind of happens. And it's just the best, man. That stuff I got going on in the backyard with the different little pieces of equipment that I have, I just never would have imagined it. I never would have imagined the stuff I was doing by the end of the workout. It's just the best. And the same thing holds true for seated meditation. If you can go through your bells and get into seated meditation fully focused, then you're in the non-formatic place. You're in the place of your emotions and your thoughts and all the things that kind of are the things that exist inside, the non-formatic stuff that exists inside the form of your being. Then you're blending with that. And that's like where can your imagination take you? Like, that's like quantum. Like if physical stuff is like classical physics, right? Newtonian physics, then the internal world is like quantum physics. So you can kind of start to see this now with this language around 4G, 5G. But that's what's happening. Like that's where you're at in your inner world. It's like quantum physics. And so quantum physics is like this idea that we're all connected and there's just all this stuff that we don't perceive. And that makes perfect sense in the context of gratitude practice, compassion practice, prayer. I mean, it's just like, that's what that is. That's quantum physics. And that's the stuff you get to interact with. So let me read this and then we'll go into the training and we'll finish up. Those who are enlightened never stop forging themselves. See, you can see the opposite of this. What's the opposite of this? The opposite of this is, well, it worked in the past, so I'll just keep using it. I'll keep doing it. No, it's just, The realization of such masters cannot be expressed well in words or by theories. Sorry about that. I mean, it's just, I can't tell you this stuff. I can give you a framework for it, but until you kind of experience it and are like, until you have the insight of, oh, that's what he means, you're thinking about it. Until you have the experience of it beyond, like, what's he doing? Am I doing this right? Is this right? Is this the right way to do it? I don't know if this is right. This doesn't seem right. Could this be right? It's never going to work that way. And then lastly, the most perfect actions echo the patterns found in nature. All right, so let's read the interpretation of it, and then we'll go. Again, there is no end, nowhere to get to. Just better interacting with darkness and gratitude for goodwill. Yep. Like fire causing a pine cone to release its seeds. Nothing new. All right. Get yourself squared away. What is squared away today? What feels comfortable today? Let's go eyes. Study the eyes. Sound. Smell. Touch. Taste. Body. Ground. Tailbone. Sit bone. Core. Heart space. Throat. Top of the head. Get into your breathing. Let's go max out. Just go quiet for a minute. So go ahead, if your eyes are closed, and open your eyes. Just want you to see how I'm situating my hands. So, looks weird. So the open-heartedness, I want you to practice kind of feeling this. So I want to start making the open-hearted element by the end something that's really physical and you can really feel it. So go ahead, take your right hand and place it under your left side. Now, this is my left, right? So place your right hand under your left side, and you can kind of feel around a little bit. You got your ribs, and you got right below the rib, got your sternum here, and then you got below the ribs. Like get right about there. Now this thumb here, you want to think about where to put that thumb because you want your other hand to be kind of here. See that? You know, what I want you to do is I want you to get quiet and I want you to feel your heart beating. Now from here, the openness, the open-heartedness. Start with just gratitude. You feel your heart by thinking gratitude. Gratitude for family, gratitude for safety, gratitude for food. This is just an awareness framework. I'm simply creating an awareness framework for you to experience the way this manifests for you. Next, think compassion. So compassion is acknowledging suffering and offering your goodwill. And so when you think about compassion and feel your heart, see if you can just put the two together. So what I'm saying in my head is for everyone suffering out there, I acknowledge your suffering, I acknowledge your pain. I offer my goodwill, my good thoughts, my peace. And when you're done, you just kind of let your hands down. But that's what it means to armor down. You armor down to open up your heart. That's where your power lies. I mean, seriously. As my kid would say, seriously. But in all seriousness, your power is from your heart. You need to use it. You need to use it. Typically, we're shutting it down. You think politics is mental health, right? Politics is a nation's mental health. Think about how heartless we are right now for so many people, towards so many people. Now, there's a lot of goodwill out there. There's a lot of good work being done by a lot of good people. There's also a lot of stuff going on that's just like, fuck the other side. Fuck them. If they're this, then they're dead to me. And that's a problem. And so hopefully our leadership will find a way through. And hopefully you will find a way through whatever feelings you have and stay open-hearted. It doesn't mean weak, and it doesn't mean vulnerable. It doesn't mean vulnerable in the traditional sense. It means vulnerable in the understanding sense, which is vulnerability is strength. And if you don't understand that, you need to get with the program. You've got to figure that out. Life just gets fucking terrible if you don't figure that out. Pleasure, armor down. Realize we've done this for, what was it, 8 weeks? This is the end of the 7th week. 40 stanzas. It's cool. Thanks for sticking with me. Later.